And the last point we want to talk about is opportunity. And what this is opportunity for growth or regrowth. And really we're going to think about it as opportunity for growth, because we already discussed how regrowth is probably a misnomer a lot of times on our cool season grasses and upland sites. But thinking about this in terms of asking yourself, have I allowed that plant enough opportunity to grow, to rejuvenate its soil its root reserves of energy? And am I grazing that plant in a time of year that is really detrimental in terms of allowing it the opportunity to grow? So some of these cool season grasses, that's going to be early spring. And another term that we like to use is the window of rapid growth. If you're grazing in that window of rapid growth on these plants, then you're probably having a detrimental impact to their subsequent production and health.
I think with cool season plant communities, you think about this opportunity business in terms of 1 year versus the next year versus the next. Because the window of growth is really short, what we're trying to do here is to give an opportunity to develop to the maximum extent in most years. And even a simple 4-pasture grazing system would do that for you in most cases.
One of the common rules there that's thought about in this opportunity is don't graze the same pasture the same time every year. And what we're saying there is if you're always in that pasture during that period of rapid growth of your key species, maybe some of these cool season species that are your key forage producers, then you're going to damage those grasses in repeated years and eventually take them out of the system.
Yes, the example might easily be like if you've got a sandy range site, Needland threadgrass would be your predominant species, but if you graze it very much year after year, in the spring you're going to change it into either a blue grama or a threadleaf sedge plant community.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So here's my little drawing down here, and this is the soil. Here's some grass plants coming out above there. These are nice cool season plants, and the example Mike gave, maybe there are needle and thread grasses, and down here underneath there is our blue grama and threadleaf sedge. Okay, so here we are in maybe the month of June, early June, and a cow walks along here, and she's got a lot of pasture and a lot of time on her hands, and she grazes off this plant right here. So she takes all this above ground growth up to that point I drew, and then walks on to the next one. So what's going to happen here if she is in this pasture for another 30 days and she comes back to the same site? Well, this plant here is going to have a seed head on it. They're probably going to be a little more mature and maybe a little less desirable in terms of a grazing plant. And then this plant here might be putting on some regrowth. So it might have some nice young growth on there. And she walks back to this same site. Well, what's she going to choose? Well, very well she might choose this plant here and regraze it again, leaving these other ones behind and allowing these blue grama, threadleaf sedge plants to fill this area in. This plant would be grazed multiple times in that growing season. It's going to be stressed going into the year, and it might leave the system. So now we've got an increased amount of our warm season or our less desirable plants in this situation, and we've got some mature needle and thread plants, which isn't bad, but if this is repeated year after year, then the same thing's going to happen. These needle and thread plants are going to start leaving the system, and these other plants are going to start coming in. So that's just an example of what we're talking here with applying some of these concepts. All right, so the first thing we want you to think about is estimating production on your ranch. And what we've got here is just an example of a simple pasture. There's a lot of ways to do this idea of estimating production. You can visit with a neighbor, you can walk in your NRCS office, you can call your local extension office and say, hey, I'd like to have an idea of what my pastures are producing. And what the terms we're going to talk about here is production in terms of AUMs. And if you're not familiar with the term AUM, it stands for Animal Unit Month. And an AUM is equivalent to what, about 800 pounds of forage, Mike?
That would be just a good ballpark estimate. There are people who like to tell you that it's 760 pounds, but that's That's kind of cutting it a little fine.
All right. Well, essentially an AUM is the amount of forage required to support 1,000 pound cow for 1 month. 1,000 pounds of animal, I guess we should say, not just a cow, but it's 1,000 pounds of animal on that piece for 1 month. Okay. So if you have a 1,200 pound cow, and she's on a piece of ground for 1 month, then she's going to take 1.2 AUMs because she's 1,200 pounds. So she might be a 1.2. If you've 1,200 pound cows are pretty small cows for a lot of folks. So maybe you've got a 1,400 pound cow and she's got a 300 pound calf at her side. So now we've got a 1.4 plus a 0.3. So what's our total AUMs of that pair? Well, it's 1.7. So really that's the idea of an AUM. And we're going to talk about what your rangeland produces in terms of AUMs. So for this simple example, and I'm going to go from the idea of estimating your production off of past grazing records. So I know a lot of folks carry maybe the red book in their pocket, or maybe they have a calendar on the wall where they're going to write down when they turn animals out and when they take those animals off of a particular pasture and how many animals they have. So if you have records that are just as simple as that, then you can start getting a baseline estimate for what you harvested that previous year and maybe have an idea of what your production is in that pasture. So for this example, let's keep it real simple. This is a 100-acre pasture. So we've got a little small pasture here. We looked at our grazing records and we had 10 cows in there for 2 months. Okay, so very simple. These cows, we're going to call them 1.2, so they're 1,200 pound cows, and they were in here for 2 months. Okay, it's kind of hard to write with this little thing, so I'll make my messy handwriting here. 2 months. Okay, so what's the math on this? Well, 10 cows for 2 months at 1.2, so we multiply all that out. 10 times 1.2 times 2 months, and we come up with 24 AUMs that we harvested. Okay, now we divide that by the 100 acres, and that makes some pretty simple math, and that gives us 0.24 AUMs per acre. Okay, 0.24 AUMs per acre. So that's what we harvested off of this piece of ground. Now, if you've got a more complicated situation, you can sure do that as well. Maybe you turned in some yearlings in there for a while. Maybe you followed it up with some bulls for the winter time. Maybe they had some cow-calf pairs come in there that spring. You add all those uses up, convert everything to AUMs, and then divide it by the number of acres, and that'll give you how many AUMs per acre you harvested off a particular piece. And that's what we're going for. We're looking for this number right here, this 0.24 AUMs per acre, and we'll show you how you use that later. So anything to add on that, Mike?
That's very good. I like your example.
Okay, and I wanted to show here just real quick if the grazing and haying record spreadsheet, if somebody wants to have a real nice tool here to use to estimate forage production, on the website we have linked this grazing and grazing record spreadsheet here. So for this example, I've got 125 yearling heifers. They're 800 pounds, so I called them 0.8 animal unit equivalents. And then I followed it up with 2 bulls, and they were 2,000 pounds, so they're 2. Date in, date out on the heifers, date in, date out on the bulls. So it does all the math for you, and right down here it tells me that in this situation I harvested 0.43 AUMs per acre from this pasture. And this is a 720 acre pasture. And then I can also do this next thing we're going to talk about on this spreadsheet, which is the grazing response index. On this particular spreadsheet, we've got our pastures across the tabs here on the bottom. And then if I go to the far end of it, it'll produce for me, if I put the whole ranch in here, some seasonal use graphs, which are really nice tools to have when we start doing our grazing plan. So that's how you can use that grazing and haying record spreadsheet. That's produced by the University of Nebraska, and I think just a really neat tool for keeping records and simplifying the math.